Ja, ein herzliches Willkommen hier im
I would like to welcome you warmly to the FFT in Düsseldorf. I would also like to welcome all the guests online on the Europe Calling website. I am your host at the FFT in Düsseldorf. We're located right near the central station of Düsseldorf, and this location has become more and more a meeting point of the civic population here in Düsseldorf. And that's why I was extremely happy when the Green Parlor, in cooperation with Europe Calling, suggested this event in order to consider how to approach the right-wing populism. And I would also like to welcome all our guest speakers here from the Netherlands and from Poland and from Germany. And I would like to pass the floor now to Harald Schwenk and to Maximilian Fries. And I wish you a very pleasant evening and a fascinating debate.
Von meiner Seite auch herzlich willkommen an alle
I would also like to welcome you very warmly, all the participants being present here in the room. This really is a premiere. It's the very, very first event that we co-host from the Green Parlor and Europe Calling, and some of the participants are physically present here in the room, and we are actually very, very happy to return to the FFT. It's our third Green Parlor event that we organize at this location, and we're always very happy to return. And it's also exciting to have this hybrid meeting. Because, of course, we need to meet the technical requirements for actually holding a hybrid meeting. Now, the topic of the evening is being successful against right-wing populism. It's not the first time that we deal with that subject. We talked about Brexit in one of our first meetings, and that's got a lot to do with this particular topic also. And then we started discussing as early as last summer whether we shouldn't be organizing a meeting on right-wing populism when the polling really showed some staggering results for the AfD, the Alternative for Germany. And then we started taking it up with Max, and here we are. And we look forward to a very interesting debate, particularly in the exchange with our panelists from Poland and from the Netherlands. And we will proceed in the following way. We will have an introductory lecture on the more scientific side from Professor Decker, and then we will hear from the panelists from the Netherlands and from Poland and from the member of the German Parliament. And then we'll have round about 45 minutes for a debate with our audience. Thank you very much, Harald. I would also like to welcome you from my side, from Europe Calling. You see me sitting here with a laptop. That's due to the fact that this is the 186th meeting of Europe Calling. I would like to welcome the 1,700 participants from 27 countries participating here tonight. And we have a long-standing experience, and I'm very happy to be cooperating this time with the Green Parlor. I am Maximilian Fries. I'm the Managing Director of Europe Calling. I'd like to thank the interpreters. I think they're both in Brussels right now. They interpret for us online, and they help us to overcome the language barrier here tonight. My role today is to take care of your questions. Here in the room and online in the chat, you will find links and the QR codes to access the question room. I will be posting it in the chat in a minute, and we will all use that together. So everyone has the same fair chance to share their thoughts. You can also rate the questions of others, and the result will be a prioritized list of questions that we will then take up in the second half of the meeting. And very important, I would like to ask you to give your name, because it's much nicer than remaining an anonymous user. And those are my preliminary remarks. And I would now like to pass the floor for the introductory lecture to Professor Frank Decker. He's a professor for political science and sociology at the University of Bonn. He's an academic director of the Bonn Academy for Research and Teaching of Applied Politics, and he's one of the leading experts on populism. We really look forward to your presentation, Professor Decker.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Fries, for those kind words of introduction. Thank you for having me. So, what you've asked me here to do is to present the content of a book, actually, or rather, a university lecture, and squeeze that into 15 minutes. So, I'll do my best. Hope it's going to work. So, what is populism? Let us start with that. And what is it not, according to the definition? Now, when we talk about populism, one might think that it's actually popular with people, but this is not necessarily the case. Populists, they don't necessarily want to be popular. On the contrary, they break taboos. And to them, although they might say it's important to them to have the majority of the population behind them, no, that's not important. They want certain sections of the population to support them. And what characterizes populism is that they're always in the opposition, opposition to the mainstream, or the so-called mainstream. Now, populism, amongst researchers, there was no agreement. Is it an ideology? But as a consensus today, most agree that it's a very thin ideology. Thin meaning that they need to go in hand with other ideologies. So it's somewhere on the threshold between left and right. So which means they can go hand in hand with extremism. But it is not congruent with extremism. There might be extremist forms of populism. That is true. One of the well-known researchers, Karl Mörder, looked into radical right. That's what he called the right-wing populism. That's somewhere in the middle of things. So it's no longer moderate, but they're not extremist yet. So what is the main feature? It's anti-establishment. So radical criticism of those in power, the ruling elites, but not only. There might be corporations, parties, government apparatuses, public broadcasters, for example. This is what populists go against, but also trans and supranational institutions might come into the line of fire. So this brings us into the EU field. And what is the other side? The reproach is that they do not care about what the people think or what the people want. Populists would say, oh, we know what the people want. And we actually represent what they want. And then populism, so it is said, is illiberal or anti-pluralistic. Well, if that's true at all, probably true, for the right-wing populism, with the left-wing populism, I'm not sure. I have my doubts. All these features could be put into proportion. Many come from the so-called establishment, many leaders in populism, and then they claim that they represent what people want. Well, isn't that what other parties do as well? So do they know what the common will is? Do they know what people want? No, actually, with some rhetoric, let's look back into the history of the Federal Republic. The right-hand side parties, they actually sort of agreed amongst them about things. So it's just an exaggeration in terms of rhetorics. So anti-liberalism and pluralism, the German AfD, what they claim is they go for a liberal market policy, but how can they be illiberal if they actually defend liberal positions in certain fields? So whatever claims there are, whatever is said about those groups, it's still not really easy to grasp populism and have a good definition for it. So look at how it turns out. We've seen populist phenomena before. In the United States, for example, there was a populist party, end of the 19th century. Well, that was a party representing the farmers' interest. They called themselves Populist Party, and that's where the name comes from, actually. But it's never been a phenomenon that could be observed everywhere at the same time. And this is something that has changed ever since the 80s. What we see now is that there's a new family of parties that have taken hold in the political systems. And ever since the year 2000, they gained more and more voters. So what would you call a family of parties? They share an ideology, but also the fact that their structure is comparable, the structure of voters. And perhaps what we could also compare is new forms of organization. What we often heard was that it was typical for populism that they have very charismatic leaders, Spitzenkandidaten. But I don't think you could say that in general. I don't think anybody would think of Tina Kropala as being specifically charismatic as a person, as a leader. So even without these descriptions, these parties can be quite popular. Now, the pioneer phase, that was the 80s, the main phase, excuse me. So the hardcore Front National, Rassemblement National today, the Vlaams Blok in Belgium, Lega Nord, FPÖ in Austria, they were created around the 1980s. And they sort of transformed into right extremists. Now looking at the FPÖ in Austria, there was a preliminary phase in Sweden and in Denmark. And then what happened in the 1990s? Many jumped onto the bandwagon. We continue to see this phenomenon. And Germany is actually a bit of a case apart because it took some time until with the AfD, a party of this kind took root in Germany, the East to start with. And perhaps let's take a specific look at the Central Eastern Europe with the new parties. Here, looking at the right-wing populists, we find that they are part of a, national conservative stream that have gained momentum. PiS in Poland, for example, or Fidesz in Hungary. And there are other special cases that are difficult to categorize ideologically, left or right. Movimento 5 Stelle, for example, but this movement has lost importance. And the Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance, recently founded, we have a populist party that would be more to the left in the political scene. There's Die Linke at the left in Germany, so this is kind of an offspring, if you like. But when it comes to values and what they want to fight for in society, actually they defend right-wing positions. not unlike those of the AfD. Looking at the development here, you can see there's an upturn ever since the 1980s. So the beginning, it was about 10%, but now they might reach more than 20%. So these are average EU values, but the lower curve is more interesting. So when the parties are represented more in the government, or in parliament, excuse me, they will actually more likely become members of the government. So this goes hand in hand. Once you've got the power, once you're in government, you grow stronger. And this is what we saw in some countries. Democracies were actually cut down and restructured into authoritarian structures. Looking at the most recent election results, you might see there's a strong upwards trend. A few exceptions, Chega in Portugal, the latest results. And in some cases, the parties have joined the government. It's still open in the Netherlands. This may happen. In Sweden, we've seen this. And the most extreme case, that's Italy. Here again, we're dealing with a coalition that is made up of wholly populist parties. Marine Le Pen in France, she actually managed in the 2022 presidential election to achieve nearly 42%. So she got very close to the majority. Now with AfD, we see a slight downward trend. But we have to add that with Sarah Wagenknecht, we have a new populist representative, a new party. So looking at survey results, the populist potential for Sarah Wagenknecht's alliance is even greater. So what are the reasons? What are the roots of this development? I think there's a winner formula, a tripartite structure. So first of all, a crisis in the government. Large segments of the population do not feel represented well by the existing mainstream parties. They think that the politicians no longer understand them and are no longer good representatives. But there must be reasons for that. Usually it's the economy. But, and this is a thesis, an idea that is much heard amongst researchers, it's actually a cultural shift in our society. If you want to put it more bluntly, we are dealing with changes that no longer follow the logics of a zero-sum game so that everybody will win. It's no longer a win-win situation. There will be losers in those processes, and they feel left aside, they feel left behind, and then they claim that it's politics was responsible for their misery and for their problems. And you might compare this to the past, your lifestyle of the past. It might be nostalgic, actually. But longer term developments, that would be globalization of the economy. And this gives less leeway to national politics, taking back control. The famous term, we do lose control over such processes. And Andreas Rickwitz, a sociologist, called a society of singularization. And what is more, apart from the long-term developments, we see a short-term sequence of condensed crisis events ever since the 1990s, and they're sometimes linked. 9/11, then the major financial crisis, the euro crisis, then migration crisis, 2015-16, and the COVID pandemic. People never imagined that something might happen. Looking back at the election campaign in 2021, the COVID pandemic was still one of the major issues. February 2022, this was no longer on the agenda. Another taboo had been broken. The dividend of peace no longer exists after the Russian attack against Ukraine. Now let's look back. We're looking back at the European elections. Let's look 5 years back. So that was the populist map 5 years ago. In the South European countries, what we saw was very strong left-wing populists, with Greece, Syriza, in Italy, Cinque Stelle, in Spain, it was the socialists, who are still in power, by the way. In Portugal, they're no longer in power. So this map in the south has turned blue. In Western Europe, we see that the right-wing populism has taken flight. Also in the north, become quite established. In both regions, in South Europe and Western Northern Europe, we have to make a distinction between West and North and Central Europe. We have different routes. Reservations against migrants, immigrants, especially from cultures that seem to be foreign, that are not known to people. So you have to understand this also against the consequences of people leaving their country. In Bulgaria, for example, we heard it. 20 to 25% of people left the country. So what does that do to society? And this dividing line actually goes right across Germany between South and North. So in Eastern Germany, when it comes to these developments, we can understand it better when we compare it to other Central and Eastern European countries. However, it's a very heterogeneous phenomenon. There are things that are in common. One of the things that are important is that people do not want a deeper EU integration. They want more competences, i.e. sovereignty, at the national level. Another common denominator, the national orientation. But the national orientation goes along with a pan-European understanding of identities. It's identity politics. But this is actually a more Western, a Christian identity to, make a difference to the Muslim or largely Muslim immigrants. So this is what links those parties. But apart from these common denominators, there are major differences in their ideologies, in their programs. And this might explain why these parties find it so hard, for example, at European Parliament level, to set up an alliance that has some teeth, or a group that has some teeth. We've got two right-wing populist groups in the European Parliament at the moment. So looking back at 2019, here we have the breakdown of the seats. So we see populists in three groups. Many are not non-attached or non-aligned. In 2019, that was the result. And of course, there's sort of, people changing or modifying their stance. It looked a bit different. Fidesz is very well known. They were excluded of the EPP, the European People's Party. Basically, they anticipated being checked out, and now they are amongst those who are non-aligned, no group. So this will be a new force in the European Parliament. It's be interesting to see where we will find Fidesz. So let's look at the survey. Christian Democrats and Social Democrats in the European average remain more or less stable in the support they receive. The Liberals, they're lagging a bit behind. And the right-wing populists, they will certainly win more votes, probably be lost in a more moderate section and gained at a more radical corner. So there's beautiful projections here, forecasts, what might coalitions look like. So we have two voting coalitions at the European Parliament. It doesn't work the way that the German Bundestag works, with a majority and an opposition. There are actually very flexible coalitions when it comes to voting. And the Alliance, actually, when they came to the Green Deal, they got together with the Greens, the Greens. The issues of interior market, they count on the Liberals when it comes to voting. And the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, they're always around. Without their joining hands, joining ranks, nothing would get ahead in European Parliament, they need to agree. They need to consult each other. Looking at this scenario, you will find out with the Liberals, we will again continue to see this majority, perhaps just about a majority with the help of the Green. And there's also the opportunity, the Christian Democrats with the two parties on the right-hand side, but it's a no-go politically because the EPP will refuse to get together with the radical populists at the right-hand margin. So this international of the nationalists, this does not exist because we see major political differences. One example, for example, the Russia policy. Look at Meloni. The Italian head of government is taking the transatlantic course, supporting Ukraine, but AfD has actually become the counterpart. This is a pro-Russian party in this family of parties. How would that go together in Parliament? And there are comparable differences in other issues. Marine Le Pen took her distance from the AfD because their extremist positions in the migration policy, they just go too far for her. The AfD becomes more and more radical. Other parties, under Meloni, also Le Pen, trying to moderate their parties to make them acceptable and to reach out to voters that otherwise they would not be able to join. And empirically, this can be proved quite nicely. The voting cohesion, so the group discipline in the parliament, is lowest, by far lowest in the two right-wing groups. So clearly lower than in all other groups. So the crisis in representation, distribution crisis, identity crisis, what do I mean by that? I think this can be mirrored in European policy. In the European Union, what we have is conflicts of distribution within the EU, but also the immigration crisis or issue, and also the free movement of workers, one of the major points on the Brexit, and people fleeing their home country. So this is not something that the populists made up. We have a deficit in democracy. The European Union is just very far away from people, and this is, just have to be honest about it. So actually, I've gone way beyond my speaking time. What to do? That question, I leave that for the discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Komme ich gleich hier hin?
Ja, bitte. Sie auch, Frau Winkelmeier-Becker. Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Decker.
Thank you very much, Professor Decker.
Für die andere Moderation. Vielen Dank.
Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Also ich kann schon mal sagen, eine der Folien hat mich irgendwie
I was very impressed by your prognosis. On one of the slides, what sort of coalitions would be possible in the European Parliament? And certainly the role of the People's Party are omnipresent. They are really necessary to find a majority, and I'm sure that we'll be having a debate on that also. But for now, I would like to welcome Pieter Hilhorst of the Netherlands. He's a journalist, a researcher, moderator, and an innovator. And I'm very happy to have you here for our debate. We have sent you a few questions in advance because it's very interesting to have a closer look at the election result in the Netherlands between the winning party and the difficulties of actually establishing a government majority. So what is the situation in the Netherlands right now? The party, the Freedom Party, on the one hand, won the elections, but is not able to build a parliament. So perhaps you can explain us what the situation is.
I'll talk in English, not in German. Sorry for that. No, I think that the big shock of the elections in the Netherlands was, of course, the big win for the party of Geert Wilders. And he got 1 in 4 votes, more or less, and was by far the biggest party. And after the election, basically immediately, people were thinking, how is it possible that the PVV, Geert Wilders, is now the biggest party? And I think to explain that, you have to go back to the fall of the former government. So the former government was headed by Mark Rutte. He's a liberal, right-wing liberal politician. And basically, he engineered the fall of the last government on an issue on migration. Because he was basically thinking that people would then associate the issue of migration with his party instead of the PVV. And this totally backfired. So by having engineered the fall of the former government on migration, migration became the biggest issue in the election. And as one of the members of Geert Wilders' party said on the night of the election, if you give people a choice, they will always vote for the original and not for the copy. And I think, and I think one of the other things that is that was a big difference is that beforehand, the party of Mark Rutte said that they wouldn't govern with the party of Geert Wilders. The new leader of the Liberal Party said, okay, there is a possibility that I will govern with Geert Wilders' party. And that made it for the first time, it was also for voters a good idea to vote for him because they could hope that he would form a government. And I think that another issue, there was a huge debate in the Netherlands whether or not the voters who voted for the PVV were basically racist or were anti-Islamic. And some commentators said that it was a protest vote and not a racist vote. Yeah, but I don't think that's true because you have now election research done. And basically, people vote for the PVV because they agree with the issues and policy proposals of the PVV. And the slogan of Geert Wilders was a slogan where he said, let's put the Dutch on number 1. Yeah, but this is what he meant with to put the Dutch on number 1 was only the original Dutch were put on number 1. So all the migrants, people who have a migration history, people who came from different countries, they should be second-hand citizens. This is, of course, unconstitutional. And I think that now that in the Netherlands we have a coalition government, so that means that is it still? Can you still hear me? Something goes wrong. I'll talk on. Ja.
Nein, wir hören sehr gut. So,
okay, sorry.
Max hat nur die Position gewechselt.
Okay. Now, so
I can hear you very well.
Because we have a coalition government, so even the biggest party can't form a government on its own. So now there's already for months there have been talks and fights among the different parties that are willing to form a government with Geert Wilders. So the first concession, which I think is a very funny concession, no, not a funny concession, more a tragic concession, that Geert Wilders said, all right, I will uphold the constitution. And this was a concession. I think that's incredible. And the second concession that he did is said, all right, I can understand that I won't become prime minister. But of course, he didn't want to become a prime minister because basically one of the things that people should know is that the PvdA of Geert Wilders has only one member. So it's a political party with only one member, and that is Geert Wilders. So he's the only one who has anything to say about what happens, which means that his span of control when he becomes prime minister, then he also has to manage all his members. It's really hard. So people say he prefers to stay in parliament and to have someone else to become governor. But the negotiations are still going on. And I think that, what is the real issue about what can we do about this right-wing populism? And I think there are two issues that I want to raise. And the first one is because migration was the biggest. Oh, something's wrong? I see Agnieszka. I hope that you can still hear me. Sometimes I hear the translation, otherwise I don't. But I'll continue talking. Okay. So there are two things what you want to achieve, and the first thing is that you have other issues which are more important than migration. So, for example, social economic issues. Because if you ask the voters, then basically they are on social economic issues, they're more to the left. But if it's on migration or cultural issues, they're more on the right. So the first thing is that you have to fight about which issues are on top on the political agenda. But I think the last part that I want to raise, and that is there's something that has been forgotten. If people feel isolated, then it's just one citizen vis-a-vis the government. And that means that the isolation is good for populism. So what we need to do is organize and make sure that people are part of organizations, of unions, because then they don't feel hopeless. Then they feel that they are connected to other people who are willing to fight for them. And that is something that has been mostly forgotten because of this globalization. It's very hard to promise something on a social economic issues because you can't uphold your promises. And then people start to become less and less ambitious. And so they're less ambition on socioeconomic issues, and we didn't invest a lot in how to organize people to make sure that they're not on their own, but that they are organized in unions, in associations, in neighborhood associations, and that I think is a way to go. I hope that everything was clear. I don't hear anything now.
Okay, dann vielen Dank.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we get this organized, Max? Okay, I hope that everybody hears me now clearly. Thank you very much. And I would like to welcome Agnieszka. She's a journalist and the editor-in-chief of an online magazine. And we look forward to hearing from you about Poland. You had general elections in October, and there was an alliance for the election set up, the KO alliance, and I'm sure that you will enlighten us on the decisive topics for the elections. And you now have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you for invitation. I had a feeling that maybe what I will gonna say, it will be not so happy that what you would like to hear, because after the election last year, when law and justice lost the power, when peace lost the power, I had a feeling that in all Europe, everyone was clapping hands and shake hands to Donald Tusk, who is a leader of coalition of civic platform. But this election, I think, shows us something very important about the populism. And before the election, in KrytykaPolityczna, in organization where I work, we had published a book called Society of Populists. And we asked the question, is it possible to fight with populism and not use the populism masks, not use the populism tools? Because if after 8 years, the society could see how the populist government works, how they use the public television, how they use the public institutions, it really changed the society. And we could see this even during the campaign. Then Donald Tusk, he was ready to use anti-migrant slogans. He could record anti-migrant videos. He used the same populist language to win with law and justice. I mentioned this because this is very important questions. Is it possible to stop populism? Is it because the people who try to do this very often they use these populist tools? You asked me what happened after the election. Of course, the government changed. We have a new government. The last election was amazing because of many reasons, but one of them is very important. It is the record, the most amazing turnout in a voting. 75% of the people went to vote. I mentioned this because in this election, it's not like the Law and Justice lost a lot of voters. It's not like the people decided that those populists who are in the power, we don't like them right now. Law and Justice, exactly, they lost 400,000 voters. And the Democrats, they have 2,600,000 more voters. Why it happened? Because of this turnout. It means that there were many people who were years, in previous election, they didn't vote. Right now, they decided to vote. In this group, the huge group was young people and women. For the first time, the turnout in a women's group was bigger than in a men's group. And it's that we had before the election, we had lots of campaigns that invited asked women and young people to go to vote. And it really changed the situation. But because so many people went to vote, even if they didn't before. But it means that the Democrats, the coalition, the civic platform, Donald Tusk political party, Third Way, left-wing political party, they could have more voters. But it doesn't mean that the populists lost so many voters. And we had a local election last week. We had a second round this Sunday. And in this local election, turnout was of course, lower. And probably it will be the same in European Parliament election. It means that this huge wave, this huge, so many people who went to vote, it's not like they will gonna stay with they will gonna vote each time. So maybe it happened once, probably. It's possible. And that's so it's not like the populism ended in Poland on October 15 last year. I think it's a very popular message from Poland, but unfortunately, it's not true. And right now, this new government needs to show to these new voters, to these groups that decided to really mobilize themselves. There were amazing stories like what happened on October 15. There were people who stayed in a line to vote till 3 o'clock in the morning. So that was the huge mobilization, and it didn't stay with us. And these groups, this young people and especially women, they will gonna wait what this new government will do. And the second myth, I think, around the populism in Poland and about this what happened is that something changed on October 15, and there is like new emotions, new politics, and so on. But I want to mention the protests we had in Poland in 2020, women's protests, because Law and Justice, they wanted to change the abortion law. At the end, they changed, the Constitutional Court changed this abortion law. It's very strict, one of the most strict in Europe. So when Donald Tusk is telling the coalition he built, the government he's a chief of, this is the coalition of October 15, like one of my colleagues, the sociologist from KrytykaPolityczna, always say that, no, it's not. This is the coalition of women's strike. Because after women's protests, Law and Justice started to lose in the polls. So then there was the breaking moment. And when we did the research in KrytykaPolityczna, when we did, because we run the research institute, we do focus group with the voters. We could hear that the voters, especially young voters, young women, they often repeat that the breaking point, that the moment when they decided to mobilize themselves was the women's strike, not October 15. So this is not like, the Democrats in Poland, they won the battle, but not the war. I hope it's not very sad message from Poland.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich finde das ganz ermutigend irgendwie. Die Botschaft ist angekommen, die Frauen waren
Thank you very much. I find it really very encouraging because the women were decisive for the elections. Their topics were decisive, and I think that's a crucial moment to celebrate. We will now change over to Ms. Winkelmeier-Becker. She's a member of the German Parliament. She is the deputy chair of the CDU North Rhine-Westphalia and also chairwoman of the Legal Affairs Committee in the German Bundestag and a former judge. We had sent her a few questions. How does she assess the demonstrations in the beginning of the year? I've never witnessed such big, huge demonstrations in Düsseldorf towards the end of January. The topic is our democracy. Is it really fortified enough? How can we make sure that we can defend our democracy? And how should we carry out the defense of our country against the far-right populism? And where do you see the role of the political parties? Thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you for this opportunity to join the debate on this topic. When I talk about populism in Germany, things become quite easy because it is very straightforward for everyone to see in this country what's happening. And I certainly witness it even more closely in the German Bundestag, in the German Parliament, because, of course, we have the contributions of the AfD and the BSW. They explain their strategies and they have all been explained here also. They are very nativist in their approach. They also argue that everything should first go to the Germans and then perhaps to someone else. And it is really quite upsetting to see that very quickly they conclude every argument with hints to migration being a problem. The party does not accept democratic institutions, basically. In the last elections for the chancellor of Angela Merkel at the time, it was very telling that a member of the AfD simply took a ballot paper, went to the toilet, put it there, and tweeted a very awkward remark. You can always say in an open democratic society that you want another chancellor, but you cannot do that sort of thing. That's really not acceptable. And that is our experience with the AfD. Now, if we look further afield, we know from a study of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation that far-right populist approaches have really made it into the society. Even in those circles where people would normally describe themselves as being of a leftist orientation. About 12% of those people accept populist approaches. And also 7% of voters of other democratic parties. This simply shows us that the mentality has changed profoundly, that they act according to a different agenda, and that apparently these ideas also find approval in other political parties. Now, how can we react to that sort of development? The state itself reacts in its own way, always on the basis of our so-called basic law, which is the constitution in other countries. We have a division of powers, and I think a very extreme one at that. So we are rather resilient. We have also considered the ban of the party. We have also considered the withdrawal of the fundamental rights for certain individuals. All that is covered by our basic law. And then, of course, we have the constitutional safeguards and a specific service that really acts like a watchdog over the constitutionality. We have brought the so-called Reichsbürger to court, something that appeared unimaginable even a short time ago, and we are reconsidering the use of party bans. There are controversies about the usefulness of such an approach, because some parties, some members of parliament also say that we need to stay in dialogue with the people concerned and the parties concerned, because that's more important to bring about a turnaround. And perhaps there's also the risk that some party members will not express their real opinions any longer, fearful of a ban. On the other hand, it would be important to really show the strength of our democracy, and also perhaps to lower the influence of such a party. I think we should really prepare for such court cases, and perhaps prepare materials and consider whether to move down that road. Obviously, we need a majority for that, the majority in the parliament or the majority in the council. But you need to be very well prepared, and you also need to think about the timeline. Of course, you can consider whether you first want to scrutinize the Thüringen association of the party, just that chapter, for example. But we also have a debate going on about the resilience of the German rule of state. We have a constitutional court which could be used to that extent and for those purposes, but we need to make sure that we do not have a deconstruction of a democracy, because Poland is a very good example of how you can actually deconstruct a democratic state and governing bodies, and then have to organize a turnaround. So it's really important to fortify all these powers, but we also have a piece of legislation on the constitutional court and the constitutional organization of the state, which can be changed by a simple majority. And that is a danger, of course. We should change that. We have 2 senates at the Constitutional Court, and you cannot manipulate them. You cannot, but you must make sure that you cannot have another senate, which will be given the more dangerous cases. We have a 2/3 majority on everything that has to do with elections. Nobody can push their candidate through unless they have ample support from other factions. So all of this is legally enshrined, and we have a long-standing tradition, and many of the things will probably have to be taken up in our basic law. We are having some very constructive debates on that, on how to fortify the democracy even more. And I think that it would be useful to also have a look at the European Court and the possibilities that they have. Then there's a council of the ministers for internal affairs at the European level, and they should probably also have a look at the resilience of democracy in Europe. The demonstrations in themselves are extremely important, I feel, because they come from the grassroots, and they really are a very important window of venting your opinions, and Correctiv reported on that, and they reported namely that some of the extremist positions are in no way shared by the general public. And it is important to be able to turn around to these people and simply tell them, this is a red line and you shouldn't overstep it.
Vielen Dank, Frau Winkelmeier-Becker. Wir hatten dem Publikum versprochen, irgendwie, dass es auch 45 Minuten bekommt. Und das können wir jetzt schon nicht mehr
Thank you very
einhalten.
much, Ms. Becker Winkelmeier. We've promised 45 minutes to our audience, which we cannot adhere to, but we'll do our best to have at least this half an hour. So what kind of questions did we receive? Oh, more than 50 questions, says Max. So, well, we started a tiny bit later, so well, I'll keep it brief from my side, and I'm sure we'll manage half an hour. So many exciting questions. Chefin KrytykaPolityczna. Actually, she's the winner here. She has the top questions, 3 of them. Excellent questions. So the top question, Agnieszka Wiśniewska actually replied to that. So what are the factors why the right-wing populists were slightly reduced in Poland? They were contained. But Stephanie KrytykaPolityczna has also asked another question. Perhaps Professor Dr. Decker could come in here. You asked the question what to do, and there are a number of slides left of your presentation. So I'll ask Professor Dr. Decker directly. The European elections in June, they're not very popular in Germany. What about Poland and the Netherlands? How could a joint strategy of the National Democratic Parties work to contain right-wing populism? So a joint strategy, what could that look like? We don't have a real European party, I'm afraid. Very regrettable. We have sort of alliances or groups of parties. And with the European elections, we vote for our national parties. In Germany, that would be the CSU or FDP. And the parties actually run their elections that are, focused on the national issues. And the opposition actually gains from that, because whenever they're in power, government looks bad. So the European elections are quite helpful to change national governments, but that's not the point. That's not the purpose. It'd be more interesting, and what we would wish for is that we have a discussion about European issues and talk about right-wing populism. Well, I more or less agree with what you said. Now, we'd better prevent for the following case, that the AfD in the Eastern German federal states could actually manage to hurdle the threshold of the minority and make it into parliament. So here the 2/3 rule makes sense, because that way it's avoided that the majority under the government can actually change the rules to their benefit. So that's a good thing. On the other hand, when judges need to be elected with 2/3 of the votes, and the AfD has a veto minority, they can block that. We've seen what that leads to in the United States, not only in Poland. So an opposition party will be obstructive. They will not be constructive. And if they put spanners in the work, then you can about guess what they will do once they're in government. So with a resilient democracy, it's a bit difficult, because we're changing rules that actually point very concisely to a certain party. So, of course, you're playing checks, and then you can't change the game and play Hammer or another game, a card game. So any measures taken by the resilient democracy, they're actually not democratic. So we use non-democratic means to make sure democracy stays alive, but it's the same narrative amongst right-wing populists. So the main focus, I'd say, should be on the fact that the potential voters just voting to protest against the government is contained, because they might take root, and people might feel things, might just have a gut feeling, and then in the end they're convinced, the voters are convinced that this is actually the case, what they're feeling. To avoid that, the only solution is to do better governing, better politics. And our Dutch colleague has touched upon that. Economically speaking, let's say voters tend towards the left. We have a distribution and justice problem. So this is an issue not touched upon enough. When it comes to migration, people are just overwhelmed. they feel helpless. And this is something that the parties haven't addressed yet. And if they don't manage to do so, they will not be able to contain the right-wing voters or potential voters. It's important to prevent people thinking that way. I was actually on a training for teachers in the south of Germany, Baden-Württemberg, and there were 200 teachers. We discussed about how to build up democracy. And apart from teachers, we also had members of the parliament, of the federal state. So in Baden-Württemberg, another federal state in Germany, politics is taught at school, but they haven't studied it at university. They're actually not experts, so we need to invest more into political education. It won't be a solution for everything, it's not a panacea, but at least it could be a good way. And everything else, that is something you need to have as a reserve seat, if you like. We really have to tackle the issues. Thank you very much. So Agnieszka and Peter, let me get you back into the discussion because that question was turned to you as well. Perhaps Agnieszka first and Peter. So the question, looking at Poland and the Netherlands, what are your expectations for the European elections? This is something that's definitely asked. And what is your perspective on a strategy to contain right-wing populism? Both of you touched upon that. You already said something about it. Perhaps
Europawahl in euren Ländern.
Actually say it more precisely. What needs to be done? Agnieszka.
As I mentioned, like the most important the factor that helped the Democrats to build the government, but because remember, Law and Justice won the election in 2023. They had the biggest score, but they couldn't build the coalition. The Kaczynski's party, there were no party who could build the coalition with them. So they couldn't build a coalition. That's why they do not have a government. So the Democrats, the opposition, they could build the coalition. They are in power because they mobilize people, like us, and also young people. This is amazing because in the group of the youngest voters, 18 years old, 29 years old, the turnout, the percentage of voters in this group rose. The percentage of voters like who voted rose from 46 4 years ago to 71. It means like, can you imagine like how many, of course, we know demographic reason that we know demography, like younger people, this group is smaller than the older, but still the mobilization of people who were maybe not interested or they thought that, those old guys, because let's be honest, this is like for the 15 years, like in Poland, we have like the fight between Tusk and Kaczynski. These are old guys, old boys. And for the young generation, this is like the same fight all the time. And this huge mobilization, I think this is the answer. And if it will happen again in European Parliament election, there will be the bigger chance for probably for democratic parties to have a good results, but also these young voters, they need to see the results. They need to see that something is changing. What is happening right now in Poland? I mentioned this huge women's strike because this is very important. Right now, this coalition, built from 3 smaller coalitions, 3 parties, they proposed 3 projects of how to change the abortion law. It means like, they have the one government, but still they cannot propose one project how to change the abortion law in Poland. It means like that if these young voters, these young women these young people who stayed in a line till 3:00, they will see that nothing is changing. They will not gonna mobilize themselves. I think the mobilization, this is important to invite new people young people, to invite people to really be active in this political activities.
Jetzt die gleiche Frage auch nochmal an Pieter.
Right, same question to Peter, the Dutch perspective, and perhaps, Peter, you could build the bridge to young people.
Actually, so it's true that European elections are very much about domestic issues and domestic fights. So I think that for the Netherlands, it will be very important whether or not we will have a new government with or without Geert Wilders' party, the PVV, because the popularity of the PVV has grown since the election last fall. But what I think that the European election should be about is about actually this wonderful slogan about Brexit, about taking back control. But my analysis is the opposite from Brexit. It's not national control, but international control. So you have issues where you need a European fight, like on climate, like on fighting international governments, international corporations. And these are things that you need to do in Europe, and you need to mobilize people, say, this is the chance to take back control. But the only way to take back control is to do it as Europeans. And I was inspired by Agnieszka's thing about turnout. Actually, I want to do a proposal. And the proposal is this. I think that the number of seats in parliament should also be dependent on the number of people that vote in your country. So if in Poland or in Hungary or in Germany, the turnout is lower than the average in Europe, you lose seats in parliament. This is a way how to make sure that you say, well, we want to have all the seats that are possible, so we want to vote. And I think this is a very nice, elegant proposal to promote voting for a European election.
Danke, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. Now on this first topic, when I was a student representative at the time, we offered free beer to get people to vote as an incitement. So perhaps today we need different methods, of course, other than beer. Thank you very much to you both for your perspective. Let me continue with the questions. Number of questions that I'd also like to address to Ms. Winkelmeier-Becker on the role of the conservatives. Perhaps some of the messages are not very nice, so take care of how you speak. Mr. Werner actually asks a very good question. So CSU, free voters, and in Bavaria, how could that work? He mentions Lindemann, no heating, it's the Greens' fault, Lindemann here, and he doesn't actually give facts. Strobel actually 6 to 8 weeks ago, she wrote a book about radicalized conservatism. We had her here in the webinar. So the role of conservatism. We still remember what Friedrich Merz said with the so-called little pashas. And that's a different language in the CSU or CDU. But the question is quite an exciting one.
Yes, well, I really enjoyed those 16 years with Angela Merkel. I think that we need a better government. And I'm talking about the government itself, but also about the opposition. I would like it to also be critical of our own role. And I don't think it's a matter of asking who's really right, who's far right, who's an extremist, but there are a number of things with this a traffic light government that simply don't work. I think we have to look more closely at the content and also at the style. Talking about content, I think a few issues need to be taken up. We need a critical assessment of our are problems, and they need to be identified. I don't think we'll come to a solution if we don't call out the problems. And the migration debate that was so hugely important in the Netherlands, we also have a problem at the regional, at the local level. People do have problems and they raise them. So we shouldn't turn a deaf ear on those problems. But despite every debate that we have, we must understand that we're talking about people looking for a better fortune, for designing their own future, for a hope of a better living. So I think there must be some understanding and some empathy with those people who request asylum, for example. It is also enshrined in our basic law. And if we still have problems, then we should perhaps look at the different categories of problems and also tell the world that not everyone can come, of course. So let's not move from one extreme position to another extreme position. I think that's really our responsibility as a union. I don't regard my party as a primarily conservative party. The C also means that we are a Christian party in the sense of being a human, humanistic, perhaps, party. We should all understand that people have the same value. Every human being has the same rights to a better life as everyone else. And that's something that must never be forgotten. Talking further about content, I think that we need to be very clear about the problems that we need to tackle. And it should be possible to describe the problems without then putting them somewhere in a shelf or in a category of something which is acceptable or not acceptable, and looking at other political
auch ausbreiten möchte. Darin möchte ich wahrgenommen werden, ernst genommen werden von der Politik. Und wenn ich auch erklärt bekomme, okay, das ist dein Interesse, die anderen haben ein anderes, das müssen wir zum Ausgleich bringen und so weiter, dann wird das auch akzeptiert und nachvollzogen. Aber ich glaube, an der Stelle sind wir nicht gut genug.
Vielen Dank für die ausführliche Antwort. Wir haben jetzt, ich gucke auf die Uhr, wir haben jetzt noch mit Überziehen ein paar Minuten, so 10 Minuten Zeit, und ich habe jetzt hier noch zwei Fragen oder zwei Fragengebiete, wo ich gerne auch noch mal die Polen und Niederlande reinholen will. Und zwar ist die eine Frage, oder ganz viele stellen die Frage, ich lese die mal von Elisabeth hier vor. Ich persönlich schätze das Internet, wir könnten uns sonst hier gar nicht austauschen, das stimmt, aber meine Hypothese, die antidemokratischen Entwicklungen der letzten 10 bis 15 Jahre wären nicht in diesem Umfang geschehen, ohne die Ausnutzung, in Anführungsstrichen, von Social Media. Was können wir tun? Fragt Elisabeth. Und die bekannte Stefanie fragt genau konkret eben zu TikTok und jungen Menschen und zieht das auch auf Niederlande und Polen. Ich würde Herrn Decker vielleicht als erstes dazu hereinnehmen zur Rolle des Internets und Social Media. Sie haben ein paar Gründe ja am Anfang gemacht, vielleicht dazu nochmal einzugehen. Und dann würde ich sehr gerne von Agnieszka und Pieter nochmal hören. Ihr habt ja auch beide über junge Menschen geredet, was die Rolle hier dann von eben TikTok und anderen sozialen Medien auch in der Mobilisierung, die ihr beschrieben habt, sein könnte. Also erstmal Herr Decker und dann gerne nochmal die anderen beiden.
Also erstens mal die These der Zuhörerin ist richtig. Diese Kurve, die ich eben gezeigt habe, die wäre seit Mitte der 2010er Jahre nicht so steil nach oben gegangen, wenn es diesen Strukturwandel, Jürgen Habermas nennt das den neuen Strukturwandel der Öffentlichkeit durch die sozialen Medien. Man muss sich die Tragweite verdeutlichen. Jeder von uns kann selber Journalist sein. Die Filterfunktion des Journalismus, die entfällt. Und das ist natürlich für die Rechtspopulisten genial. Sie können ihre Wählerschaft direkt adressieren über die sozialen Medien. Sie brauchen den Umweg über die traditionellen Medien nicht mehr und können dann die traditionellen Medien noch umso heftiger als Teil des Establishments beschimpfen, das mit den Politikern angeblich unter einer Decke steckt. Was kann man dagegen tun? Ich würde sagen, erstens natürlich als Gegengewicht den Qualitätsjournalismus stärken. Wir müssen dem Journalismus vielleicht auch mit Subventionen unter die Arme greifen. Wenn wir Opernhäuser subventionieren, dann sollten wir vielleicht auch Zeitungen subventionieren, damit es dort ein Gegengewicht gibt. Zweitens brauchen wir, da bin ich wieder beim Thema politische Bildung, dazu gehört ganz zentral Medienbildung, Medienerziehung. Da muss angesetzt werden und die Gegenaufklärung muss in den sozialen Medien selber stattfinden. Also da sind die Rechtspopulisten auch in den anderen Ländern ja weit vorne, jetzt neuerdings auch bei TikTok. Deshalb, man erklärt damit, dass die AfD jetzt neuerdings auch bei den jüngeren Wählern so erfolgreich ist. Landtagswahlen in Bayern und Hessen. Also die anderen Parteien müssen da Paroli bieten, ob das jetzt unbedingt klug ist, wenn Olaf Scholz oder Friedrich Merz, ich mache das mal paritätisch jetzt, da auf TikTok unterwegs sind, das kann man ja dann bestreiten. Aber dass die Parteien insgesamt und die jüngeren Abgeordneten haben das ja auch längst erkannt, dass sie das machen müssen. Ich glaube, eine andere Möglichkeit gibt es nicht. Und dann geht es natürlich auch um die Frage, wie man das reguliert. Aber das ist natürlich ein sehr schweres Thema. Bisher ist es ja nicht wirklich gelungen. Ich glaube auch, wir müssen den zivilen Umgang mit solchen Medien dann auch selber einüben als Gesellschaft. Da kann man nicht immer nur nach dem Staat rufen. Aber das wären so die 3 Empfehlungen, die ich geben würde.
Vielen Dank. Dann gerne erst Pieter und dann Agnieszka noch dazu.
Yeah. So the strange thing in the Netherlands is that there's been research done on how much money political parties spend on Facebook and social platforms. And the strange thing is that Geert Wilders, the party of the PvdA, hardly spent anything. So from all the parties, he spent least on social media, and still he won. And that was an amazement when this research came out. But I think that it's true that the whole idea that you only cater for your own people, that is an undermining of democracy. And I think we should, for example, have an obligation for social networks to show which political ads are shown in a library for which things. I think these kind of measures help to make sure that you know what is happening. A lot of things we don't know what's going to happen, and I think with artificial intelligence and fake videos, it will be even harder to. So you need to know what is shown to which public, and I think that we should organize some regulation around that. Because if you don't, then you get that people are totally within their own information bubble, and they get more and more extreme in their ideas. But I think that the other thing is that there's also some common decency. A lot of politicians show short clips of debates, for example, where they only show their question or their comment without any response from someone else, or to a response to humiliate someone else. And I think we should just show that this is a way of doing politics where you only try to have a better position for yourself by humiliating someone else, that in the end all politics will go down the drain.
I had the feeling that the biggest winner in each election, in each country, these are social media, because they earn so much money on adverts. This is like really amazing. Also in Poland, how much the politicians, they really spend on first on survey, on analytics, and then on really targeted their audience ads. And this is this is also the biggest winner of this political situation is, like, Mark Zuckerberg, probably. So this is something that when we talk about the social media, of course, like I mentioned this campaign that really built this huge turnout in this election. And it was possible because of the social media, mostly like Instagram and TikTok. And many of these campaigns were done with like no money, or almost no money. But on the other hand, we had lots of money spent on adverts. And this is how we all know that, how this bubble like is working. The politicians, they prepare the adverts especially for the concrete group of audience, and this audience, and you see what you would like to see, and you you just stay in the same like the state of mind. So this is the how much money you can spend on this campaigns. This is very huge thing, but it's not like the social media can help you to win the election. This is you can spend a lot of money on that, but it's not everything. And we could see this also like in Poland, but but I agree that if there is something important in discussion about the politics and the social media, is money.
Vielen Dank. Vielleicht ein bisschen Werbung für Europe Calling machen. Wir haben auch schon Webinare genau zu diesem Thema gemacht, wie die Algorithmen funktionieren und warum es für rechte und hetzerische Botschaften viel leichter ist, mit dem gleichen Geld viel mehr Menschen zu erreichen, als für progressive und prodemokratische Argumente. Also das liegt manchmal gar nicht oder in der Regel gar nicht am Versuchen, sondern das ist einfach ein ganz krasses Missverhältnis, was die Algorithmen angehen. Da auch nochmal Werbung, kann ich den Link dazu nochmal an alle schicken, die das gerne machen wollen. Jetzt ist die Zeit uns ein bisschen davon gelaufen, das war ja klar. Ich möchte gerne eine Abschlussrunde machen zu einer Frage, die ich sehr spannend finde, hier aus dem Publikum, die sehr viele Stimmen bekommen haben, die aber sehr wenig gestellt wird und deswegen, und glaube ich in unterschiedlichen Ländern ganz unterschiedlich gesehen wird, und deswegen würde ich die gerne stellen, wenn Harald mich nicht stoppt. Okay, gut. Das ist auch wieder von Stefanie. Und sie fragt, wie schätzt das Podium das Instrument der Bürgerdialoge, Bürgerräte und Volksentscheide sowie weitere Instrumente der direkten Demokratie ein, um Rechtspopulismus zu bekämpfen? Also, wenn die Bürgerinnen mehr Sagen haben, bekämpfen wir damit den Rechtspopulismus. Und jetzt würde ich quasi in umgekehrter Reihenfolge geben. Frau Winkelmeier-Becker legt los. Das ist unsere kleine Schlussrunde und dann gebe ich weiter.
Ich glaube, dass wir gut beraten sind, über neue Beteiligungsformen auch nachzudenken. Wir haben hier jetzt unterschiedliche genannt, die aber auch ihre Pros und Kontras haben. Also das muss man auch sagen. Es eignen sich sehr wenige Fragen dafür, einen direkten Volksentscheid zu machen, weil ich erlebe ja auch Beratungen von Gesetzen, da sind nochmal Feinheiten und dies und jenes muss nochmal geändert werden. Das ist in einer Ja-Nein-Entscheidung mit der Bevölkerung einfach nicht nachvollziehbar in vielen, vielen Sachfragen. Bürgerräte finde ich sehr spannend, auch wenn es da Kritik auch manchmal aus meiner Partei gibt. Man muss sich halt darüber im Klaren sein, dass sie beratende Funktion haben, dass sie nicht die eigene demokratische Legitimation mitbringen, aber dass sie doch mit einer hohen Plausibilität denjenigen, die hinterher die Entscheidung zu treffen hatten, Maßgaben mitgeben können. Und sie stehen dafür, dass eben eine ganz andere Sichtweise, die nicht aus der politischen Blase kommt, sondern wirklich auch die Legitimation einer lebensnahen Interpretation haben, dass das schon bereichernd sein könnte. Da wäre ich jetzt bereit, da offener mit umzugehen.
Vielen Dank. Herr Decker.
Also ich bin sehr skeptisch, was beides angeht, auf der nationalen Ebene. Bei der direkten Demokratie sowieso. Ich glaube auch, dass diese Bürgerräte jetzt in Deutschland so ein bisschen auch der Ersatz dafür sind, dass man eigentlich von der direkten Demokratie vollkommen abgerückt ist. Also auch diejenigen, die Grünen und die SPD, die waren ja vor, die Union war immer dagegen, nicht die CSU oder die CDU, aber die SPD und vor allem die Grünen sind davon abgerückt. Also sie setzen dann mehr auf diese beratungsförmigen, deliberativen, sagt man in der Politikwissenschaft, Formen der Bürgerbeteiligung. Ich glaube aber, dass diese Verfahren ihren guten Sinn haben auf der kommunalen Ebene. Denn wenn wir mal die beiden Hauptkonfliktthemen nehmen, die auch dem Rechtspopulismus gewissermaßen als Antithemen die Wähler zutreiben, dann ist das die Migrationspolitik. Das wird uns in Zukunft weiter beschäftigen. Wir werden Fluchtmigration behalten und wir brauchen Arbeitsmigration. Das wird uns auf Jahre und Jahrzehnte beschäftigen. Und das andere große Thema ist die sozial-ökologische Transformation. Und das findet alles auf der kommunalen Ebene statt. Die Flüchtlinge müssen dort untergebracht werden. Und die Kommunen müssen Gebiete ausweisen, wo Windparks errichtet werden können. Und das verursacht Akzeptanzprobleme vor Ort. Und da jetzt Bürgerentscheide zu machen, die dann oftmals, das ist dann ein Mittel der Dagegenpolitik. Ne? Man will das eben nicht vor der Haustür. Da muss ein Ausgleich geschaffen werden. Und dafür sind diese beratungsförmigen Formen der Beteiligung besser geeignet als die direkte Demokratie. Also ich würde sagen, lasst das auf der kommunalen Ebene stärker ausbauen. Auf der nationalen Ebene wäre ich skeptisch. Da kann auch der Effekt sein, dass die Bürger noch frustrierter sind, wenn sie dann schöne Empfehlungen machen, die werden dann am Ende nicht umgesetzt. Das ist übrigens auch nicht gut bei den Bürgerräten, dass man sagt, da sollen ja die Interessenvertreter ausgeschlossen werden, weil die Bürger natürlich über den Interessen stehen und sie wissen besser, was das Gemeinwohl ist. Dann wird das Ganze in das Gesetzgebungsverfahren gegeben, denn es muss ja, das sind ja nur Empfehlungen und dann werden die Interessenvertreter natürlich schon auch ihre Interessen durchzusetzen wissen. Da kommt am Ende nichts dabei raus und dann fragt man sich, was soll das Ganze? Also ich glaube auch die Bürgerräte, die bisher, wenn man mal ehrlich ist, der Bürgerrat Deutschlands Rolle in der Welt hat die deutsche Außenpolitik um kein Jota verändert. Also bitte keine Placebo-Bürgerbeteiligung, sondern Bürgerbeteiligung muss einen Unterschied machen. Und das kann sie, wenn überhaupt, nur auf der kommunalen Ebene.
Dankeschön. Ich habe so das Gefühl, das könnte auch was sein, was man an der Bar gleich noch diskutieren kann hier vor Ort. Agnieszka.
These are like really nice tools, like the Citizens Assembly and so on. But I would like to mention one thing. If we would like to have like really strong democracy, we need to have really strong democracy at school, at work. You can have like the best lesson about the democracy, but when the students will gonna leave the class and they will gonna see that no one cares what they think, no one listens to them, no one treats them as a partners, that it has no sense. The same at work, in a workplace. Like this is like everyday life when we spend like lots of hours, and it's the idea that we will gonna maybe build something where some people will gonna discuss and will gonna practice how democracy can look like, and the rest of your life or your everyday life is not a really democratic, like how it will gonna change the situation. I do not believe in that.
Peter?
Yeah, so I very much agree that we should practice democracy also on the workplace and in schools and in neighborhoods, because that's how you learn to make sure that not what you want is the only thing that matters, but that you have to negotiate with other people. That's why I'm very much in favor of liquid democracy, which means that you can also say, I want to give my vote on a certain subject to someone I trust. And that means that you have people in your own neighborhood you trust, and you give them your vote on a certain issue. Because that's a way for people that they are not on their own vis-a-vis the state, but that they have people in the neighborhood that say, okay, I'll give my vote on this issue. And it can even be members from a church or members from a union, or on this issue, I give them my vote. But then they have also the obligation to come back to their own constituents and to say, this is the compromise we did, and this is why I stand behind it. And that's something, this coming back to the people who gave you your trust, to come back to them and explain that you made a compromise. That's what is lacking now in politics, and that's a huge drive for populism.
Super, vielen Dank. Das war's dann hier von den Publikumsfragen, und ich gebe für das Schlusswort noch an den Harald ab.
Ja, danke, Max. Wir hatten uns eigentlich auch eine Schlussrunde überlegt. Ne? Die ging dann mehr so in die Richtung, wer nimmt hier jetzt was mit oder möchte noch was abladen oder zurückgeben. Irgendwie, das sparen wir uns. Ich will das jetzt nur noch mal für mich sagen. Irgendwie, ich fand es eine unglaubliche Bereicherung, mal wieder irgendwie nicht nur in der nationalen Bubble zu diskutieren und die Stimmen von unseren Nachbargästen aus Polen und Niederlanden zu hören. Irgendwie, das ist durchaus irgendwie, das öffnet durchaus immer noch mal den Blick, für mich auch. Und in diesem Sinne danke ich jetzt unseren Podiumsgästen allen, insbesondere natürlich nach Polen und in die Niederlande. Und für die anwesenden Besucher, Gäste, irgendwie gibt es jetzt gleich noch einen informellen Ausklang an der Bar, wer das möchte. Und unsere Online-Gäste irgendwie möchte ich in den Abend verabschieden.
Feiern.
Vielen Dank.
Genau. Vielen Dank. Alles Gute.
Bis zum nächsten
Mal.